Okay, it's 3 o'clock. We're starting our meeting. This is the 27th of September. November, sorry. Study session, which is a continuation of an earlier meeting where we're discussing the multifamily housing building requirements. Okay, so can we have the roll call, please?
I'll just announce that Councilmember Hawkins Melonian has a used absence, as well as Commissioner Paul Tinelli.
Okay,
Commissioner Lerner. Here. Commissioner Bryant.
Here.
Commissioner Polito.
Here.
And Commissioner Lane.
Here.
You.
good timing. Yeah, that's you.
Councilmember Holland.
Here.
Councilmember DeGolia.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis.
Here.
And Mayor Whitmer.
Yep, I'm here. Okay. First item and only item is the study session item, which is continuation of the discussion for multifamily housing objective design and development standards. And this follows on to the public session where we took input from the people that came to those meetings. Okay. Brittany, I think you're running it, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
She is, but before she gets started, you might want to do the public comment period, or just prior to it.
Okay, are there any public comments? Sorry. Yeah, no, these public comments have to be directly
On the
related to
agenda.
this item.
On the
Any
agenda.
public comments?
There was one that was submitted that was requested that he mentioned for the records. Mike can announce that.
Did this come from there?
But I'll share with you.
So we did receive a public comment from Tom Georgie and Stephanie Sargent.
What?
We received a public comment from Tom Georgie and Stephanie Sargent that was sent to the city council and has also been posted online. So I conferred with the city attorney and she confirmed that we can just announce that and it would be included in the public record.
Okay. Any other public comments from people online? Anthony? Okay, then we'll close public comments and we'll go to the study session. Mary, you can go.
Good afternoon, council members and planning commissioners. Thank you for joining us after the holiday to re-engage on this topic. As Mayor Whitmer pointed out, we did have a meeting on November 1st that was a study session to go over objective design standards as an initial launch point for their development for multifamily housing. Unfortunately, we weren't able to complete the discussion for that hearing, or the study session. So this is really just kind of the continuation of one meeting into another. With that said, we did supplement this meeting with a staff report that was to really acknowledge both the fact that we had a second community workshop that was already scheduled and noticed. So we used that as an opportunity to collect more feedback. So there's a summary of that feedback in the staff report. And then we also provided additional information for the density bonus program and how that could look in Atherton, depending on what the inclusionary housing program might be for the town. However, with that said, I do want to point out that it's really important that we focus on actual objective design and development standards today. We do need that to get the document moving forward. And at the last study session, you'll recall that we presented multiple tools to month or so. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Tom Ford, who will be picking up from where we left off at our last meeting.
If I could say one thing, I think I was a little, and maybe I'm the only one, but was a little confused about what our marching orders were last time. I had the idea that the city council and the planning commission were supposed to develop objective design standards, which was not what we were supposed to do at all. We were simply supposed to give you guidance on things that we thought were extremely important or extremely onerous, so that you would have a framework to develop the standards for us to approve or not approve or modify or whatever. So I think we got off on a sidetrack and didn't on other objects, but I also don't think our marching orders were clear. So that may help us get through today with some success, I think.
Sure. And thank you for raising that. We did have 5 or 6 questions that we had in the first staff report, which were really the information that we were wanting to receive from this body. So we can refer back to that. Although Tom has developed a kind of block diagram study to give you greater insight in what standards could look like when they're applied to massing. And then he has also built out some interesting concepts relative to privacy and making sure adjacent neighbors have some privacy screening, because it's come up in a number of other topics that have made it out to the planning commission and the city council, most notably the ADU program. So we have additional information we can share with you on those points as well.
So first off, when we were looking at these block diagrams the other night, which I thought was very, very good. I think not all developers are going to build an apartment building. Some are going to build, like they've done over in Menlo Park, these little condo units that may be connected, or maybe they're not connected. I don't know, but and so we need to consider that, because that might be actually more amenable in our environment. And secondly, some of the comments that were at the study session that I attended, which I wrote you a letter on. I thought that, and in fact, one of the comments that, I would like to bring to everybody's attention was one of the people that brought up several of the items, which you now have included, said, well, I just want to make everything so expensive it can't be built. And I don't think that that's what we're doing. What we're trying to do is protect the neighbors, but things need to be done. So, requiring every design to have underground parking, of course, adds a lot of cost to that, and will make it so that they can't make it feasible to build, or they're going to have to ask for a variance to go up, which I think is even a worse case. So I think we need to think very carefully about the items that we're putting in. Unless our objective is to make sure no one can ever build anything, and then when the HCD does their first audit with us, then we'll have to go through this whole thing again, which I don't think would be a very pleasant experience. So if we can do underground parking, that would be terrific, but I just don't think that, and if we can have setbacks that equal what we have today, that would be great, but I'm just not so sure that that's something that can be done. I think we need to, consider, any and all possibilities, or have a way for people to come back and request a variance and put some guidelines over what type of variance may or may not be approved. So anyway, that's, especially when people say that in an open meeting, I'm just trying to make it so that nothing can ever be built. That isn't going to be very helpful.
Well, okay.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So
I left the last meeting with a whole list of questions. Top of the list for me was, how big is the big house? The second question is, will it fit on one of the Bay Road lots? And so the answer to that is it would be 172 feet long and 60 feet wide. And I don't want to go through all the numbers, but we can certainly do that. So the Bay Road lots on average are 170 feet deep and 220 feet wide. So right off the bat, that says that the current setbacks are meaningless with that type of volume. And it's a 3-story, up to 40 feet high structure. So that's what it'll take to accommodate the R10 zoning and the state's bonuses that they're handing out, and in terms of market for 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath sort of condos.
Mhm.
So that's my point. So we can go through all the block diagrams, but to be honest, they're sort of meaningless because you got to grapple with 172 feet, right? And so on a Bay Road lot, it's going to have to align with the street with Bay Road, and that only leaves 24 feet on each end. 20 of that 24 feet on each end is going to be a driveway to come in and go around and come back out. And so so that's the first thing to sort of grapple with. And I think there's a whole set of objective design standards that flow from that. But as we go through it, one of the things that I realized is that the impervious coverage, meaning no ground to absorb water, is between 80 and 90%,
Of the lot.
right?
Mhm, mhm.
Of impervious coverage when you add everything up. And so there's specific implications of that we would have to address. And so I have a list of what I would propose for objective design standards, but I wanted to start with that.
So thank you, Commissioner Bryant. It does sound like you've been able to take a look at the block studies already. For the benefit of everybody else here, I would like to be able to run through that presentation before we start critiquing them. And sidestepping them is meaningless. So with that, unless there's any.
Well,
Oh.
I have a comment.
Yeah, I don't think they're meaningless, but I think they're, well, go ahead.
Well, my comment was along those same lines, but it was a more open-ended question to open up discussion about the large home, the large structure model. Because looking at these, obviously, we build very large homes, private single-family homes on our lots. And almost the entire site does get paved over with patios or sport courts or swimming pools or whatever. And so I think we're kind of pushing up at the edge of the envelope for that. Anyway, about 80% of the whole land, there's not a lot of open space. It's not like the 2,500 square foot ranch burger on an acre lot anymore. And, you know, the natural setting. So we're already kind of doing that, but I just looking at the large home, models and thinking, how are we going to get even 20 apartment buildings in that one structure? And then the cars, I mean, it just doesn't seem feasible with the height limit and the setbacks that we're doing because the massing. So I wanted to ask, you know, how do the designers, how do the planners kind of envision that? Because I can't put my head around it.
Why
Yeah,
don't we
I'm not-
go through the staff.
Yeah, I want to go
presentation?
through the staff presentation, but I just want to say that I have always felt the large home concept was only one possibility for the range of things we would offer because the lots will be so different. And sometimes a separated condo approach would actually look better in certain neighborhoods than the large home concept. I mean, some in the smaller lot, in a smaller lot area, like 1 acre, it could look better to have 4 individual units.
Yes.
So I think the objective for me is, one, look at the large home concept as an option, but then come up with a range that a developer would actually feel like, oh, well, this will fit in the neighborhood and that won't cause a big problem, but it'll also give me the results I want for the investment.
We have to be careful about giving developers options because, you know, in the perfect world, we think that they're going to make the right option and you give
Right.
them the options, but sometimes they're not. And so
Right.
I'm really fearful that we're going to
Yeah.
pass something that's just not going to be what we expect it to be.
Well, the one thing I would worry about, if we make it too narrow, then we get stuck with it. So,
Well, and that's, you know, as I said earlier, you know, I just don't see that we should have a whole lot of apartment buildings like what were being proposed earlier at that meeting. You know, I think separate type of condos, again, like Menlo Park has done in many, many cases, I think will fit better into our community. And maybe we can't fit as many on a piece of property, but I think that that's a better way to go.
The density has to be reduced.
Yeah, right,
Is that what you're saying?
right.
I
But-
think, I think the problem with that idea, I mean, I'm a fan and proponent of houses on small lots. But the state is handing out bonus density and they expect it to be used. And so if we ignore that
Right.
and don't make it available, it's got to, I mean, I'm sure HCD is going to respond to that.
Right.
This is the problem with 23 Oakwood.
I agree, but it's the developer's choice whether or not they're gonna take that density bonus. We can't obligate it.
No, but if we allow subdivision so again, I favor that, but if we allow a small subdivision for 4,000 square foot lots, you know, we're enabling not pursuing the density bonus.
Well, let's move through
Let's
the
go with the
presentation
staff
and then
report. Yeah,
develop Q and A from there.
right.
Okay. Let's begin. We'll wait for Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Planning Commission Chair. When Brittany said he, she actually meant they. I brought a colleague today. My colleague Poe did most of the graphics that you've seen in the presentations so far, and he also wanted to see a deliberative body discuss our work. So he's here with us today.
Be careful what you ask for.
Next. So it was requested to me from Brittany. I'm not sure who actually requested from her, but just to go through quickly, some of the imagery that we showed at the workshop number 2. And so that's what we have here. And what we did, we were trying to understand if this big block or the big house typology would work on a typical parcel. So this is one of the Ravenswood parcels that we're looking at right here. And what we did is we sort of took an average between a studio apartment and a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, which is on the large end. We were saying that average is about a gross 1,000 square feet. That would include circulation, vertical circulation, patios and such. So we assembled think of it as Lego blocks. We assembled a series of blocks that are each 1,000 square feet. And they're about 10 feet high. They're exactly 10 feet high to represent a story. And then we said, let's just see if we take 10 or 13 of these, depending on if someone were to execute the density bonus. 10 is the base zoning and 13, maybe you could get to that with density bonus. And see if you can assemble these on a lot. So these, I just want to caution you, these are not architecture. They're just to help us understand development yield. They're square blocks. An architect is going to bring all kinds of artistic nuance to it, mold that massing around and such. But we were just trying to do a development yield.
Yeah, can I just make a quick
Yeah.
comment though? You know, where you're showing these lots like this one here and putting 2 or 4. All you have to do is do a lot split and you can add, turn a lot into 8 on each side, 16. So that's already available to people. So I think we should say, well, is that, how would that be? But and we know how it could be, but larger lots with higher density, that's really what we're, I think that we're looking for. I don't know. see what other people think, but you can do lot splits and you can, put a JADU, an attached ADU and an ADU and then a primary residence on every one of those lots.
I think the value of the presentation, since we already saw it at that workshop, community workshop, is to kind of address Elizabeth's question about how you put X number of units on a lot. The only problem I have with it, and maybe you fixed it, is that that's a perfectly square acre lot, which is totally different than
Most everybody's.
almost, yeah.
That's actually not a square. That's I think it's 185 Ravenswood. It's a little bit longer on the left side than it is on the right. So it's a,
But he means
Yeah.
odd shapes. He means they're not rectangles.
right. I'm only
squares.
looking at the sites that you assigned to us. There's like 5 on Bay Road and they're generally square.
It's a polygon.
I mean, the in the back of everybody's mind, if not the front, is the Oakwood property, which is, the tip of the iceberg. And it's nowhere near like that. So if our objective design standards means he can't build anything on that, we're starting off in the hole.
Sure. So Commissioner Polito, we do have one multifamily development property identified in the housing element currently. We are hoping to add more to meet HCD's requirements. And there are, I think, 8 potential alternative sites that we're looking at, maybe 7. 23 Oakwood is the 8. They all generally reflect this typology, what you're seeing here. So just
ones
as a
on Bay.
reminder, the discussion questions that I have for you, one of them is, is there support for the direction of the large home approach for guiding building mass? So that would be a discussion topic for us to explore relative to Ravenswood and Ringwood versus Oakwood. Additional standards that need to be included, whether or not the list of standards that we presented last time is exhaustive. To what extent should the RM10 standards identified in the housing element for 23 Oakwood, which had that 40-foot height limit, referenced, should be direction to staff. So in that sense, 23 Oakwood was already kind of put aside as a separate discussion topic. Should the PFS standards identify in the housing element provide direction to staff? And should the large home typology guide building massing and site design for those properties? And then council has previously discussed that multifamily development at POS should preserve existing open space and function as infill development. Should the large home typology guide building mass and site design for those properties? So if the outcome is you'd like more typologies across all the different sites, that's good feedback. That's the type of direction we're here to get. If the outcome is you like the large home typology for all lots except for 23 Oakwood, which needs to have more flexibility, that's good direction for us to hear as well.
But a reminder, just because we're looking at 23 Oakwood, the proposal that you heard at the last meeting aside, there's no formal proposal, there's no overlay zone, there's no zoning change at this point in time. If you want to remove 23 Oakwood from consideration as a council, you can certainly do that in the next iteration of the housing element, and then just keep the ones that are more square or parallelogram in nature, because they create a more reasonable approach to your objective design standards.
Let's go through this. I haven't seen the presentation of this. I've seen all the other presentations, so I want to see it.
Okay, thank you.
You should come to the meeting.
No.
Are you saying we didn't measure it right? Or are you saying you don't think the 1,000?
I'm saying 1,000 square feet doesn't represent a market market-based condo. A market-based condo would be 2,000 square feet.
Yeah, but you can't do that.
Well,
where do you come up
ADUs,
This
can be
is-
800 square feet up to 1,200 square
Yeah.
feet.
Yeah.
That's for an ADU.
That's for an ADU.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm talking about a developer building a condominium complex
Mhm.
with most of the units being 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath. It's 2,000 square
He
feet.
said these are studio, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms.
But the exercise here is not to make it financially feasible for a developer to actually do it. It's to provide for multifamily opportunity in the town of Atherton. And if a developer finds it feasible, great. If it doesn't, if a developer can't do it because of land value and buy-in cost, that is not the town's particular problem.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
And, you know, someone else needs to do the economic analysis. But my point is I do believe that the most value created for the developer is 2,000 square feet.
Well, that will be a natural limiter by the square footage allowed on the lot. So that'll balance it. So if we provide direction that says you can have this much if it fits for you economically, then the developer will say, well, I can't make 1,000 square foot or 600 square foot a studio apartment work in Atherton. So I'm going to do 2,000 square feet, and therefore you just take all these numbers and divide them in half, and you have the number of units that they're going to propose.
Yeah,
But, but then our plan is, hey, we provided a plan that says you could do this.
No, but it's, I'm sorry, Chairman, but it's actually backwards. So there are a number of units that between the city and the state that are allowed to be developed on that lot.
Correct.
The question is how big do you make those? So the developer's coming in knowing that he can build 14 units on that lot. And admit-
Within the requirement of our setbacks and all the other requirements that we have. So those don't get thrown out automatically.
At the end of the day, we're building affordable units.
That's
so
the
they're not-
maximum number of units.
Yeah,
We're-
they're not.
we're
they're
actually-
not supposed to be luxury units or something, you know.
No, this
they're
is
gonna
the
be-
funny thing, and
They're gonna be for.
Brittany,
teachers
correct me
on
if I'm,
Periodic basis.
Well, Brittany,
that's not, but that's actually incorrect.
Here's
So
the
Brittany,
presentation.
clarify that. If we come up with a plan that says you have to have these setbacks and this setback and whatever fits into that space, you can do at the limit that the state states. Can the developer come in and say, that doesn't work for me, so I'm gonna make 2,000 square foot units and I don't care about your plan?
Yeah, you have to remember.
Oh, I want to
30
hear, I want to hear her answer on that, because that's critical, because if he's right, then we got a different strategy. But I haven't seen it that way in 2.5 years of watching it.
Not without seeking a modification
Right,
through either the town's process or a density bonus program.
right. But the density program would still have to fit within our requirements of our
Yeah,
But
building.
through the program, you are allowed to have concessions or waivers, right? So if you had a development standard that the average unit size has to be 1,000 square feet, there could be a concession where we would have to grant some flexibility there. Now, what I would say in order to get us back on track, talking about objective design standards,
Right.
is that Commissioner Bryant would like us to hone in on what the reasonable building block scale should be. He doesn't agree that it's 1,000 square feet. He thinks that we should probably consider something greater at 2,000 square feet, which we can kind of think through this exercise because it's going to say, okay, you can have 13 units, 1,000 square feet each, and this is what the massing is going to look like. So we can go back and think, all right, well, so if we were to do 2,000 square feet, how does the massing change that? We come back to you with feedback, recommendations, and standards,
All right.
and then you make some harder decisions then.
well, about a third of our units that we need to fill, and that could include just the ADUs and things like that, are supposed to be for low income, very low income, and extremely low income people. And so, and going through HIP housing, getting placed here, or maybe, you know, through Stanford or whatever. So, I mean, we're not building luxury apartments. Yes, there's upper level ones that could be used as retirement homes and things like that. Those could be bigger, but overall, we just need to have kind of an average. But a third of of the people that are going to be here are going to be in, less expensive apartments. So they're not going to be big apartments.
Mayor, I think that staff can actually, would not necessarily agree with that. The state density bonus law that is now in place.
Yeah, I know what that is. I've read it several times.
Okay, so on this, the one that I looked at on Bay Road, the numbers are that basically with the state's bonus is that you can go up to 14 units on that. Out of those 14 units, 3 are for low income. 11 are market rate units, market rate being in Atherton, $2.5 to $3 million a piece.
Yeah.
So it's not building this mass of low income housing. That's not what the numbers are.
Well, it's up
Mayor
to the
Whitmer?
developer to come up with something to say that they can do, or they want to invoke the density bonus. If what they're building takes up all the space within our guidelines, then they can't exercise that.
Well,
City
on top of
attorney's
that-
got a comment, I think.
Yeah, on top of that, they can't, the bottom line would be that if they build it too dense, nobody's gonna buy their $2.5 million unit. So the balance of that is the market pressure to make a unit that actually someone wants to buy.
Yeah, I agree with that,
Yeah.
but I'd be pretty confident as a developer that a 2,000 square foot condo in Atherton will sell for between 2 and 3 million. Because again, look at what the units in Los Gatos are selling for.
Commissioners,
Yeah.
we really need to focus on the design standards and
Right.
not
And I think that. the
Mona
city
had a comment
attorney
as well.
wants to Say something.
city attorney.
Oh, is that right? Mona wants to say something. Mona?
Thank you so much. So a couple of comments. Number one, your task today is to provide direction to staff to come up with some objective design standards. However, those objective design standards cannot be so onerous that they provide an unreasonable restraint on development. As an example, if you put, 15 feet setbacks on every side and you can't actually build, that's not going to be upheld, right? The other thing, to Commissioner Polito's comment at the beginning of the meeting, trying to understand what your charge is, I want to draw everyone's attention back to the absolute need to come up with direction by the end of today's meeting so that staff can prepare those objective design criteria, because we have until January to adopt them. And if we don't adopt them, we're subject to penalties, further penalties from HCD. And the other thing that can happen is someone could submit a builder's remedy application. You don't have any objective design standards in place, so they're going to build whatever it is that they want. And then the final point that I wanted to make is that we really need to prevent basically exercising discretion on behalf of a developer as to what they may or may not be building. That's really not up to us to determine, and whether or not they actually build because of the financial feasibility is really a question for some other day, and it's really their issue. And we can address it potentially through discussions about, CDBG grants and so forth. So my strong recommendation is to just allow staff to finish their report. And then after that portion of the presentation, focus in specifically on what kind of standards that you want. They're going to bring it back and talk to you about the consequences of those design standards on the lots that you've identified. And that's all. Thank you.
That's good.
Okay, I'll continue then. Next. So using these building blocks, we started to look at, ways that they could be formulated in the big house model, looking at one big building that might have multiple ground floor entries to different units on any side, on the road side, on the back side. And in the upper left, you'll see your existing single family home standards. You do not presently have a coverage standard for residential. So that's why that's blank. And then in the red box on the bottom right, you'll see that changes every image because it's trying to show, well, what does this model show? And again, this is not architecture. It's just a development yield. So here's 13 units of 1,000 square feet each within the R1 setbacks, actually. It comes in within your R1 height limit. It has an 11% coverage, and the FAR clearly is larger than you presently allow for single family. Next. So for each of these models, and I have 4, we just show the model, the blocks, and then we say, well, what would happen if you put a roof on it and you tried to utilize dormers on the top floor to perhaps make the floor not as tall and allow those upper units to peek out through dormers that lift up from the roof. Here's where you can start to see that there's multiple entries. It wouldn't be like a apartment building with one single entry to a double loaded corridor. It's again, it's supposed to look like a larger house and have these multiple units in different roof forms and such. And then the third image that comes with each of these models, each of these 4 models next, is just adding a garage building and some asphalt. And so this tends to, as one of the workshop participants pointed out to us, we were a little off on our FAR and our coverage calculations, but that changes it a little bit when you start adding asphalt, impervious surfaces and additional buildings. So this just shows what this might look like with 13 garage units.
But I have a question. So the data that's in the box on the right are setbacks. Is that front, rear, and side? That I assume those are setbacks.
Correct.
And why does that not change when you put a garage in there? That obviously the setback isn't 90 feet and it's 92 feet.
The garage in your single family,
10-foot setback, right?
in your single family zoning, a garage is an accessory building. It's allowed to be built in the setback so long as it's not closer than 10 feet to the property line.
I see. So that's the setback from the main house.
Correct.
I see.
Correct.
Okay.
But the rear of the garage is 10 feet from the
Got it.
perimeter. Yeah.
So that's
Which
in
is legal.
conformance with our current
Mhm.
R1 setback. requirements.
Right.
Okay.
And it looks like this accessory building is further than 10 feet from the rear setback, from the rear property line, but
It does then,
Yeah.
it is.
which was,
So the next model we looked at was taking just these blocks and putting them in an L-shaped form. Oh, I just wanted to point out, this is from your R1A standards. So you already have some objectivity to how dormers are placed, and there's a maximum size. You have certain standards for, where they can happen, how often. And so for instance, even the peak of a dormer has to be less than 2 feet from the ridge line of the main body. So you have standards already in your code that you use to regulate some of this, and we could do similar things. Next.
What does that mean? More than 50% of frontage lane?
can't go the whole width of.
I don't see the
roof line.
text, but I think there's text that goes with this in your zoning ordinance. I think it's saying if you take that blue line go back, please.
Dormers.
If you take that blue line that represents the eave of the house,
Right?
I think it's saying that the dormer has to be longer than 50% of that blue line. If that blue line is 100 feet, then the dormer has to be more than 50 feet.
That's the current code.
That's your current R1A.
Cannot be more than that.
Yeah.
It's
I
not that
think
it
it's
has
a
to be.
maximum.
Oh,
Thanks.
it
Yeah.
can't, is that right? It can't be more than that. It can be
Right,
less.
so
Yes.
the
Can't throw a whole bank of
expanse of the
dormers
dormer
on top
couldn't
of
be
your
more
whole.
than 50% of the width of the frontage length of the house.
Don't missing the word not.
Yeah.
I ask a clarifying question? So everything you just showed us, if a single family lived in that exact structure, that would be allowed. There's no changes on the setback. That all of that structure would be allowed if only one family
I'm
lived
sorry,
in
I
it.
don't understand your
I
question.
just want to make sure there's no exceptions reflected in that image,
The
right? If-
exception would be to FAR.
Yes.
So I think it was highlighted in red.
Okay,
That's to call out, hey, the standard doesn't meet R1A as it exists now.
okay.
At the first workshop, I don't necessarily agree with this idea, but there was a lot of vocal expression about this has to fit within the single family setbacks and this has to fit within the single family height. So we tried and we went in to see if we could put these Lego blocks, if you will, for the development yield and get it to work. We could in all sense, except for the FAR.
That's good.
And as Commissioner Bryant pointed out, maybe we're using the wrong size, but we used 1,000 square foot blocks as a typical multifamily unit. Oh, floor area ratio.
Okay, got it.
So the ratio of all your building to the square footage of your parcel. Next. Next, Anthony. So here's just an L-shaped building. Again, we're using 13 units. Base zoning would allow for 10, but we said, well, maybe they'll come in with a density bonus and have a few more. So we said, well, how can we fit 13? So again, we're using the single family setbacks as shown by the dotted lines, which leaves you that green area inside the setbacks, which I call developable area. And then you see the little frame that indicates maximum R1A height. And again, we've been able to assemble it in this configuration. The only thing we miss on is we are unable to match the FAR, obviously. So that's what this looks like. If you start to put some roofing on it next, you can start to see some shapes and 2- and 3-story forms, using the dormers to indicate the type of room that might be up there. Maybe bedrooms are the smaller dormers, public rooms are the larger dormers. And again, it's just a way of getting the top floor to sit a little lower by using the attic space to bring out some of the livable space. Multiple ground floor entries. It's envisioned that these are probably built without elevators. So they're trying to go into stair corridors and things. But again, it's not architecture, but we were trying to think feasibility. The coverage is only 12% before we put garages on it. And the height comes in under your current R1A at 30 feet. Next.
Yeah, just to be clear on that, means that just the floor area ratio has to do with the square footage in the unit itself. But this does take into account the footprint that would be standard for a single family home. So it's in the same footprint area, but it's just there's more stuff in that square foot area. Right?
So I have a question. So in the previous one, you
All the
showed
houses are
13
1,000
blocks. And this shows 13 blocks but you moved one behind the other. Does that, I don't, how does that work? Right? The side setback is the same as
We used,
before. So are these blocks more square and the previous blocks?
Right, that very first image showed that we have multiple blocks to get the 1,000. So some of them are longer than others,
From the very first slide, yeah.
but
No, the multiple slide, so the one with the 13 blocks, those are more rectangular, these are more square.
correct. But they each time, the Lego block, if you will, equals 1,000 square feet, 10 feet high,
But these are.
but
okay,
not
so
always
these
the
are just
same
more-
shape.
That answers
Right,
my
right,
question.
not the same shape. Next, oh, and here's looking at the coverage. Once you add asphalt, doesn't really account for guest parking, which I assume is going to have to be handled on site since you don't have on-street parking. So right now, it just shows the asphalt related to getting to the garage and then being in front of the garage, and then the coverage in the FAR reflect that additional accessory building in which the cars are parked. Next.
And is it true that we can only require one spot per unit? We can't require more than that?
One spot.
One parking.
On parking space, we haven't written that yet, so.
I know, but.
What you're referring to has to
Uh,
deal with the density bonus program.
Right, that's what I thought.
For parking.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, thank you.
Well, we can also have parking. So then we played a little bit, the next two models are basically the same, but one orients towards the rear of the property, and that's this little here again, 13 units, each
You're on
one.
page 13. What page? you on?
Yeah, they're 13.
Page 13.
This is
There's light gray on the corner, it says page.
slide 80.
Slide.
They might have- They might have
regular
a different
numbers on
printing.
them.
It's page
12
13.
and 13.
Page 13.
11.
Yep.
Okay, page 13.
Yeah,
So-
that's number 10.
12, yeah.
Yeah, that one's number 10.
Yes, that's number 10.
That's 10.
Yeah.
Okay, page 10.
Going,
That's number 10.
Okay, so here's the 13 units courtyard.
Yeah.
Next.
right.
Let's add some roofs. Let's add some entries. So again, multiple entries, ground floor to stairwells and such. You can see the green part is still just a little courtyard. Next. Adding the garage and the asphalt changes the coverage and the FAR a little bit. Next. So here's just taking that same model and facing the street. So it looks simple. Oh, it's the same model, but this would be really something nice to hear from you folks about, you know, what you think about the public entries to multiple units facing the street, or should they not be seen from the street and face parking behind or something like that? That's would be a good direction to get. So here it is with the courtyard providing something to the street environment. Next. So you can see we've drawn a little wall, it's an enclosed courtyard. You can imagine there might be stairways up to upper level units. Again, using the dormers to try to make the roofs not look so oppressive. And using roof forms again to make the building look a little smaller, a little shorter.
My comment on that is that if the garage is in the back, it would be a little more difficult for access. You know, you park your car, you have to kind of, if all the entrance is off of the front of the structure instead of
Sure.
the back.
I understand, but just so you know, not all of the entries would be off the courtyard. Some would be towards the rear property line.
But,
Um,
yeah,
But that's a good point. And somebody would, well, go to the next, please, Anthony. So somebody parks their car, but their front door is off the courtyard. You're right. They have to walk around the building, get into the courtyard and go up to their.
And why didn't you look at, or why didn't we show the parking in front? The 10-foot setback in front?
Or on the sides.
You could put it on the sides.
Would it
Definitely
be,
could.
it could
We,
also
They'd
we
be,
have
tend
to
to not
squeeze-
put the parking in front of the building so that when you're out
still
homes
10
rather
foot
than
setback
parking lot.
Mm,
from
Oh,
the,
I'm just thinking a lot of apartment complexes do. So that's all I was wondering.
yeah.
So again, with the idea being that it would keep it away from backyard neighbors and things, and also the headlights, so as people come in. Because we've even had complaints in single family homes of the headlights bugging people behind them. So again, if it goes back to the screening, you put a green screen in front of that, people don't even know it's a garage in front. So.
Okay.
It's just an idea. Okay, keep going.
Next.
One question. I understand exceeding the floor area ratio, but all your examples are 2 and 3 stories high, so you're blowing away our current floor area ratio for second stories, right?
Oh, correct. Yes, definitely.
Blowing it away, and that's the second, third stories are going to be a big issue in the community.
Right, but if you want to give us direction to try to put most of or to try to lower the FAR, have a graduated system like you currently have with your R1A. For those of you who don't remember, you have an 18% total FAR and only 7.5% can be above the first floor. So if you have a 3-story house, 7.5 for both of those upper floors.
Yeah.
So,
Top the other numbers.
but you know,
I'm pointing out that it's not just the gross FAR is exceeded. We're blowing away the second, and third story FAR, and that could be disruptive.
so.
But the height is still the maximum height, right?
Right, the height fits within, but see what you're bringing up, Commissioner Polito, is really a good point for what Brittany and the town attorney were saying earlier. If you guys give us direction on that, we'll go away happy. That would be great to hear, that we need a graduated FAR system. That's all you have to say. We'll go ahead and write the standard. You don't have to write it, but just knowing that that's important would be helpful.
Just to be clear, it's not because we're advocates for that. It's because we're advocates for feedback. Okay.
Good clarification.
Yeah.
Next. So these are the images that I was requested to bring. And I did. But I want to show you some other things that Poe and I developed. One of the things that I really heard from people at the second workshop was that for us to go away and develop objective design standards so that the windows look really good, or so that somebody has a really nice carved wood door, isn't as important as privacy.
Right.
And what seemed to really stick out, and I think Commissioner Polito, you might have even said it at the meeting, is that people really want to know how can these mitigate potential potential privacy intrusions and things like that. So we went away and started just working on doing some design things to show them next. So we looked at these issues. How can these components, these 4 bullet points, how can these things be used to alleviate or mitigate potential intrusion of privacy? Extend the current limit on the height of a wall fence, landscape screening. And today I got here early and I met your botanist or your arborist. I keep calling her a botanist. Your town arborist. I hadn't even looked at 17.5 in your zoning code about landscape screening. So she pointed us to that. We can go beyond that if we get some direction, you know, about using screening in a way to help. And so augment what you already have in your code. The upper floor windowsill height, which actually one of the participants at workshop number 2 brought up, one or more of them, and then greater side or rear setbacks. And also at the workshop were some Atherton homeowners that are immediately adjacent to Ravenswood, and they brought up this whole idea of the single family front setback doesn't necessarily, they're not necessarily wedded to it, especially if you can push the building away from your existing single family homes. So we just showed your R1A setbacks just to show as a development yield, you can get 13 units easily if they're 1,000 square foot in your existing R1A developable area, but we wanted to push it a little bit. So now we have a series of sectional drawings next, and we put the people to scale. So we just want to show, here's a 4-story building. Here's somebody looking, and the view cone goes about 70 feet across the existing 8-foot high fence is a swimming pool and a single family home that, because it's built at 80 feet setback, you can actually build it up this tall. It's about 28 feet to the eave, and the ridge comes in at 34. So that could be a single family.
Looks like 4 stories.
He said.
On the right is 4 stories because those are 10-foot floors.
Those are
Okay.
what?
And you're talking about the building on the left, the
left is-
dotted outline?
You could build a single family home, and I'm sure someone has much like that, that's 28 feet high at the eave if they have an 80-foot setback, and can go as high as 34 feet to the ridge. And trust me, these are all to scale. We've drawn them in a computer program, so it's all to scale. And really, we're not trying to judge the single family home. We're just trying to say, if you start putting these things at scale, here's somebody standing next to their swimming pool. How far away is the person? And what can we do between that person in the multifamily building and the person on their pool deck? What are some of the steps? And that was the bullet points on the slide before this. So here's some important markers. 10 feet, we were originally going to see if we could do anything with an accessory building, and we couldn't really find anything that was helping that block that view. But we have the 10-foot accessory building setback. We have the 60-foot R1A setback, and then we have an 80-foot setback just to say, hey, what if we push it further? So let's go through these next.
I don't understand the different heights of the 2 images.
One
Why
is a single family home on the left.
On the left, what on,
You can build a
So
single family.
the little triangle is the top of the single family home.
right? But they look exactly the same, those do.
What
but
looks the
on the
same?
right-hand side.
No, one's 4 stories. The one on the right is 4 stories.
That's what I'm saying. Though, what's the difference? Why is 4 stories and 3
The
stories?
peak of the single family home
looking
on
at
the
the
left is
difference.
34 feet. And then the top of you're looking at a section of a 4-story multifamily unit on the right. The top of that roof line is 40 feet. So the difference in between the top of the dotted roof form on the left and the solid line of the building on the right is only 6 feet. And because they're so far apart, it's actually kind of difficult to see that difference.
Got it.
And that's, I think, one of the points that we're trying to raise with this diagram and this series of images is where can you get the best value for design implementation to preserve and protect privacy?
Yeah.
Right. Let me just point out another thing. We drew the building on the right very generically. It doesn't have to be a large house. It could be a single entry stacked condos, but it's basically what they build. Unless it's ultra luxury, it's going to have a 10-foot floor to floor. So,
But the idea is to take a look at this image for this group here and to identify what privacy things can we get
correct.
feedback on that might impact that
Correct.
visibility cone at different heights.
So, right. So the first one on the next slide, Anthony, is, okay, let's say we extend and say you can build a wall up to 10 feet high. You can see that regardless of how far away that person is, they can still see basically to the pool. It's a long distance. It's 80 to 100 feet from that person's window. And we've drawn a three-story building here on the right. But you can see the wall is a nice gesture, but it doesn't really block that much of the front yard, of the backyard to the left. The next is landscape screening. Next slide. And I think this might be the biggest bang for your buck. And we talked again to the town arborist today about this. And perhaps, for instance, you could direct us to pursue this path and we could write a standard that says every on center, every 25 feet, the developer must provide a 72-inch box tree, which according to the arborist by 5 years is approximately 25 foot high. Now, granted, it's a tree, and even if you have a tree next to it, there's going to be places where you can probably look around. It's not like an opaque wall, but it's nice, and you already you're known for your tree cover anyway. And presently, you have a lot of trees on all of those sites, and presently the arborist is used to looking at plans that have existing foliage and the planned foliage. Okay, what do you have there now? What are you going to add? And then the arborist is able to make a decision is if the screening is going to meet the desired needs, the goal. Next.
It's something we already have codified in our requirements is extensive and robust landscape screening on your perimeters, neighbors.
Doesn't
Right.
matter
And
how
all
it's
I'm
implemented.
suggesting is we might want to augment
It
17.5.
doesn't matter how it's implemented. I mean,
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, it's
But it
there
has to
and
be
you're
5
supposed to
feet.
do
Yeah.
that.
It has to be 5 feet
Yeah.
within 5 years, which,
yeah, the individual, the landowner has to.
doesn't help
monitor it.
anybody for the next 4
Right,
years.
right. Yep.
So the next,
What page you on?
I don't have the same handout as you.
At 22,
22, that's right. That's where I was. Okay.
The next piece is just looking at what happens if you mandate a taller, higher, sill height for upper floor windows. You wouldn't do this on every window on every wall, but perhaps we would write the standard to say for walls facing directly onto a single family parcel or a parcel of less density or such. The window sill height must be a minimum.
Right.
So here you can see we haven't changed the upper limit of the view, but clearly the bottom is hindered a little bit. So it narrows the person's view cone, if you will. You could take this to 4.5 feet, perhaps 54 inches. Again, I wouldn't want to mandate every window in this person's apartment be at 54 inches, but we could selectively pick the facade at which this was assigned. Next.
I was just in a hotel this last week where the windows in the living room area next to the fireplace pointed towards the housing development next door, which interestingly was 2-story places on top of a 1-story parking lot. But it was at 54 inches and you had to get up to I had to get up to the window and look over the top to see anything. And the room itself was bright and sunny. So I wrote that as a note to myself saying, if we were to do that like on the outside perimeter and then make the front, make it more flexible on the street facing, then you could have a nice place that with good sun, and then you'd have a, you know, and your view towards the street, it would be windows towards the street.
Yeah, I think we built houses where we went even higher and we used the awning type windows. So it gave plenty of light and it gave ventilation. Of course, you still got to have exit egress in case of fire, so you can't do it for every window, but
Right.
Well, these are gonna be on the third floor.
But it's most relevant on the upper floor.
Right. If it
Not
were just on
relevant
the,
on the first.
yeah,
floor.
the third floor for sure. If we had something like that that pointed towards other towards the outside neighbors, that would solve a lot of problems, I think.
I think it's important to inject some reality in here. So, so at the planning commission, we talked about having a high sill height, like a 7-foot high sill height for the windows that on one side of an ADU, on a 2-story ADU. And I think that that's, in fact, I would recommend that as well here. But for these windows that you're talking about, you have to remember that UBC requires egress access, and there's a specific height. It has to be low so that a fireman can get someone out of bedrooms. And so whatever number of bedrooms you have, you're going to have much lower windows that are, you're not going to have a 48-inch sill.
Right. It definitely couldn't be on all 4 sides of the building.
yeah, you have to have at least
No, I'm just
one.
making the
and-
point that the
and-
rooms that have windows have to have, they have to meet a UBC egress window standard.
And you also have to have a square footage of daylight coming in. So a 7-foot high window sounds pretty onerous. I don't know how high the ceiling was, but right. Well, we can look into that, but if it runs up against the fire code, then yeah, we wouldn't do it. But I think there's places if you have, for instance, if a bedroom had 2 walls, so you have 2 exterior walls, and so you had the egress window on one side, then you could do it. So, and it's just up to us to write the standard and not make it onerous, but it's up to the developer to figure out how do they get the bedroom to fit that way so that it can work. Next.
Where are you now?
So here's what, you can't really tell, but the view out of this,
20.
higher, sill height has been,
Similar.
hampered a little bit. But again, it's by the time you get to the wall, you're already at 65 feet. So, but it just shows how it is. And then the last one is using a typical windowsill height, but pushing the 3rd and 4th stories back. So anything above the next slide, please. Anything above the 2nd floor would be pushed back. In this case, we pushed it back 20, and you can see that even the parapet from the lower floor does more to block the person's view than anything about the sill height. The thing that I'm first drawn to about this is I would want to look into the feasibility of a developer being able to build something where the 1st and 2nd floor have a certain kind of floor plate, and then suddenly on the 3rd floor, they've lost 20 feet. Can they still do a series of apartments and still have vertical circulation? So, but again, it's just an idea of taking some part of the building and going beyond the setback that the rest of the building has.
That's
So
also, this type of format though, is important to have regulations around not having a deck. Because a deck
No,
would
you can't
totally.
do the deck.
multifamily structure is a very different thing from a private home. And so a number of the suggestions that you have here don't really work. And so I am a little confused in terms of what we're trying to do. So if we're really trying to set objective design standards for multifamily housing, it has to be achievable. It's just what I was talking about, the windows. And so multifamily housing has flat roofs. You can make it look like it doesn't have a flat roof, but it has a flat roof. And the reason it has a flat roof is for the HVAC equipment that's going to be on top there. So in this case, specifically for 14 units, there's probably going to be 25 heat pumps on that roof, right? You have to have a platform for them. You have to have flat area exposed to the air for them. And that's why multifamily houses have flat roofs, is for the HVAC. We need to be realistic about parking, right? And so in the current environment, even a one-bedroom condo would, the market would expect 2 parking spaces for a market rate unit, because both partners probably work and drive, right? And so again, what we're talking about in terms of 13 or 14 units, you need parking space for 27 parking spaces just for the residents, right? Far more than what you're talking about here. In addition, there's no on-street parking on Bay Road. Right. And so you have to have visitor parking, right? And presumably it would be 1 visitor parking or space per unit. So that's another 14 parking spaces that you have to account for on the site. And so I think it's important to figure out what the requirements are that the market would expect, that building codes require, how things get built. From there, we can decide on design standards. And I understand that we need to give you direction, and I'm prepared to give it, but it needs to be based upon.
Yeah, but Bay Road's not the only location. I think that's the thing for me. That's a significant thing. I'm putting Bay Road out of the picture right now.
I'm including Ravenswood.
Right.
So all 7 of those parcels.
But there's also restrictions we have on required parking as I read it. First of all, the other question I had on that was in proximity to public transit. There was even a waiver of parking feature in it too. Like if you have 0, you're in fact, you can't require parking if it's within half a mile of a public transit. And that means that if you walk in and with a super low density unit, a studio, and that we can't even direct them to have parking.
So that's
Staff
through the
staff
density
answered that.
bonus program.
Yeah.
Right now, we're focusing on whatever the base
Right.
objective design and development standards
Right.
are. So it could be that, yes, a density bonus program comes in and modifies the parking requirement. And then there's even another layer in terms of
Right.
how they would do that if it's beyond what the state allows. But tonight's focus is just on base objective
Right.
design and development standards. And before I hand it back to you, I do want to get clarification in terms of the format of tonight's study session or this afternoon. I don't know if we've gone into tonight yet. Whether or not we're going to have a questions session and then turn it over to public comment, if we need to have a public comment opportunity and then come back and have a discussion. And then I do have a slide I think I can have Anthony pull up that lists all the discussion topics, and we can go in order, and that might help us keep things structured and orderly. So
I think
Okay.
that's a good
Yeah, let's
idea.
go with that slide.
What do you
Right.
think, Mayor?
So public comment on this before you go into that?
Yep, we'll take public comment. Yeah, go ahead.
Can we lend him?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Thank you so much. My name is Woodson Martin, and we are adjacent to the Ravenswood properties. We just have some questions about design standards that are not necessarily the topics here. So like window heights and things we appreciate, but we're wondering about things like trash, utilities, like dumpsters, stuff like that, thinking about noise and potentially smells. Also thinking about lighting, parking lighting and that kind of thing, and how that would impact adjacent properties. Any noise restrictions in general. There was some discussion of cars, but we're thinking about headlights, car maintenance, whatever. The guest parking question. Also the treatment of, runoff, wastewater runoff, or stormwater runoff, and how that's being thought through in these high coverage scenarios. There was some mention of decks and balconies on upper floors, and we'd like to have that addressed specifically if we could. And then we're also, the 25 heat pumps next door are starting to make us think about noise pollution and whatever needs to be done there. So just additional topics that are not yet in the discussion.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Kelly Martin. Also, that's me standing there basically in your picture next to our pool adjacent to the Ravenswood properties. One thing I do appreciate mention that came up at the meeting last time was not pushing activities towards the back. So, I mean, your staff consultant mentioned trying to accommodate that, and Ravenswood doesn't have a lot of atmosphere right now in these properties. Like people just zoom by on their way to school or work. So for the property, single family homes on the back of these lots that are in question, be very impactful if you push activity back there. Not sure what kind of impact putting parking, putting access on Ravenswood would have to the community, I think, or even the residents of this beautiful new building. I'm not sure it would be much. It would greatly impact us if stuff is in the back. So that I appreciate that that was recognized and reflected, and I hope that you will continue to do so, developing the design standards.
Thank you.
Any other public comments?
Thank you.
Okay, sure, we'll take Carol.
You gonna put a picture up? Okay.
She'll just talk.
Okay, there we go. I'm with you. Sorry not to be there in person. I'm down in San Diego on one of our construction projects. I did want to provide comment on the size of units. So, unbeknownst to you all, we actually build and have owned fourplexes in Boise, Idaho for the last 14 years. We've also built about 80 smaller homes with a partner out there that are roughly 2,500 square feet each. So what do our fourplexes look like? Because I think that's really the model for this multifamily housing. They're 972 square feet each. That 972 square feet is 2 bedrooms, good size, with closets, obviously, 2 full bathrooms, a galley kitchen, a small dining room, good sized living room, and then a large closet that accommodates washer dryers and some storage. But there's very limited storage. And that you get in 972 square feet, and they have a balcony. So what happens is the tenants usually put all their junk on the balcony, which I mentioned earlier. We do not want balconies on these units because they're going to be the trash depository. I don't see any way you are going to get by without having underground parking. Not when you're talking about 2 parking places per unit plus visitor parking. The lots are simply not large enough. There's too much impervious surface. It's going to be all asphalt or concrete. So the discussion about having separate buildings versus one building, it is not true that it is cheaper to build separate buildings. Now you have more roof area. You don't have shared walls. You don't have shared framing. It's a lot more expensive. These units are not going to be Atherton finishes. They're going to be very basic on the inside. So construction cost is going to be lower. Where's the storage going to be? You're going to have underground storage someplace because these units are not going to have much storage. Then the concept of an elevator versus a stairwell, it's going to take you 2 times more footage to put in a stairwell or more than an elevator. So think about that. Let's go to the HVAC units on the roof. I own shopping centers also, and that's where all the HVAC units are. You have to have a parapet to cover it. Those units are 3 feet tall. So I don't know how you're going to accommodate the extra 3 feet and the parapet that has to go around those units. Impervious surface. I think water runoff is a real issue that you're going to have here. And think about what's really going to be at these units. You're going to have dumpsters somewhere on the lot. You have to have a large driveway or multiple ones. I own a building in Savannah, an office building, and we're required to have a circular drive at the back. You come in one side and out the other. If you don't come in one side and out the other, you have to have a turning radius. So I don't see where trash or turnaround parking has been accommodated here. In terms of landscape screening, well, it really depends on the species of tree as to how long it's going to take to grow to a reasonable height. Hopefully these units do have, or these parcels are fairly fully landscaped. I'm going to leave my comments at that because there's no way within 3 minutes to get everything in. So I am going to write you all a letter tonight or tomorrow with additional thoughts on this. I think it's been a very thoughtful conversation. One additional thing I will comment on, when we build houses in Boise, we do put the dining room windows very high. The bedroom ones, it is a valid point. You have to have egress on a diagonal across the window. You're not going to be able to get small windows in because of the egress. But I think in other areas, certainly in the dining rooms, if they're put on the sides that face neighbors, you can raise those windows high. I'll leave my comments with that. It's been a great discussion, a lot of good ideas. I still think Atherton wants something that looks like a single family home. The beauty is with modern architecture, you can, it's really boxes, modern style. You can stagger those box units in and out, so that you can come in from sideways. You don't all have to come in from the front. I don't think that these buildings are necessarily going to look like a 3-story apartment building, which today's drawings have been a little bit more like. Also, it's pretty easy to put.
Carol, can you kind of summarize and wrap it up, okay?
I'm done. I'll write you a letter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it.
All right, you're going to post that. You have a slide for us to post?
Sure. Anthony, can you bring up slide 12? This is a slide that we had included in our presentation on November 1st.
Oh, it's in the pack.
And I'm going to use it to frame the first 2 questions. So this is really a slide that shows what the code section is going to look like in the planning code. It's the RM10 development standards. We have obvious standards such as height, floor area ratio, front and rear yards and side yards. But then we're also looking at upper floor setbacks, building massing, facade design, roof and eave details, porch and entry details, window details, site lighting, parking would be there as well. So with this list, I want to ask whether or not really there's anything that we're missing and that you'd like to see added. And that would really complete questions 1 and 2 that I had for you tonight.
Well, you're missing screening, side yard screening.
Deck standards.
Yeah. Well, it's got porch and entry.
You know, even if you think it's already covered up there, go ahead and share it with us because redundancy at this point is okay.
So one of the questions that I have.
Say, go ahead, Rick.
No, okay. I was just trying to figure out the process. Well, I agree that landscape screening should be up there. It's important. I think that on landscape screening, the screening should be evergreen. I don't think that it should be required to be trees. but it should be required to grow to a certain minimum height.
Mhm.
I know.
Within a certain
I
period of
have
time.
landscape screening that aren't trees like laurel and other things that are 40 feet high. And they grow very fast. And I had a neighbor who built a unit 10 feet from my wall and a back wall, which complies with an accessory building standard, and he put in screening and it looked horrible, but within 3 years it was put up. So I think screening is extremely important. I think that you don't get to larger trees by requiring larger box trees, because their roots tend not to be as strong as smaller box trees. I would recommend that we not require more than 24 inches, but that we require it to be acceptable to the for our objective design standard, that it complies with the town arborist requirements, and that it will grow to, I don't know what to say, but I would say 20 feet in 5 years.
You know, just let me piggyback on that, is that one thing we ought to consider is on these multifamily, that we don't require trees, we require something other than trees, because trees, I have a situation where the trees are now way above the sight line.
So you don't
Yeah,
see them.
yeah, well,
Do you
he
see
doesn't
them?
screen anymore.
Right.
But the neighbor next door, and when they built the 2-story instead of a 1-story, put in landscaping that was like bushy, it stays at a certain height. So trees are actually not a solution, because in 20 years, they no longer do their job.
Yeah, the English laurel,
Gonna be a town of English laurel.
yeah, well, that's more or less what Rick was mentioning, so.
There's
Rick,
other.
would you like
Yeah,
to
there's other-
continue on?
Yeah.
Shrubs that get
Right.
very large.
Right.
That I know the arborist is totally aware of and are very effective. So that was one.
Right.
A second item that I think should be up there is fencing. I would say if we're having multifamily, the fence should be at least 8 feet tall.
Yep.
Also, the issue of upper floor decks,
Right.
or whatever else you want to call it, we should prohibit that for
Right.
multifamily.
Right.
I think that's very important. I think that in terms of height, I think we should change the 40-foot maximum height that we have at 23 Oakwood. I think that was an inadvertent result that nobody focused on, and that it should be 35 feet at the maximum. I don't know how you categorize it, because I'm not a building person like some people are, but I think that building massing, I like the big house design that you guys have developed, and where there's a 3rd story. I like it with the dormer windows, not with all the dormer windows located together, so it looks like an apartment, but with more individualized dormer windows. I think that's consistent with what the Atherton look of the housing that we have. I think that your takeaway from the public sessions, that privacy is the most important thing, is that
Elizabeth, turn on his mic.
I think it's absolutely the #1 issue for people in this town.
Mhm.
What else do I have?
Parking, how about parking? You got a comment on that?
Well, wait, on floor area ratio, I think, I like it that you've made an effort to comply with the side yard front and rear setbacks for the R1, but I think where we go to multifamily, we have to the floor area ratio, we're not gonna succeed in maintaining that, and I'm okay with that. I don't know what the right answer is around floor area ratio. I don't have as much perspective as It's in the side yard, 10 foot or something from a neighbor's property is a problem. I think we need to think about what utilities and other noise creating instruments or activities are going to occur, and we need to protect the neighbors around that. I think the same thing with trash cans. I don't know what the answer is for trash, but to have 20 trash cans lined up in front of black trash cans. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the green cans, because I know people who have almost 20 green cans.
Yeah.
So, but I think that needs to be up there. That's a standard we really need to address so that it isn't out of control.
There won't be enough impervious
That's
surface.
good enough for me.
Okay,
Joining
so
green.
can I just want to tag on to make sure, the front setback, I really hear what you're saying about the rear setback. And I agree that we should, narrow up our front setback and put these large structures a little bit further forward on the property line, and give us more rear yard, moving around room with landscaping and separation from the backyard perimeters. And you're talking about fences, 8-foot fences. That would only be like on the side and rear perimeters, not in the front.
Correct.
Okay.
That's right.
And then, as I mentioned earlier, parking, we have to address the parking. I think that the neighbors, saying, well, if you're gonna park 20 cars right behind right 10 feet from my property line, that's gonna make some noise. And whether or not they need to be screened adequately so the lights aren't going into their bedrooms at night and things like that, I think those are important. So we need to come up with a solution there. And so that, as I said, also the screening. But the most important thing, as Rick said, and I said at the beginning, is protection of the neighbors. That's what I'm really focused on, is protection of the neighbors. From this, it's going to be an inconvenience wherever we put them. We want to minimize that to the maximum extent possible. Yeah, go ahead, Stacy.
I agree with you that parking behind privacy is the second most common worry that people have. And I know we're not, maybe we are allowed to require underground parking, but I'm wondering if there is instead of a carrot program that we can incentivize underground parking, where we could do something to make it easier somehow. I'm not a developer. I don't know anything about this, but everyone would like to see underground parking. That's very cost prohibitive. So I'm wondering if there's some creative thinking that you could do on that front to come up with some ideas.
Well, I mean, just to that point, I wonder if we couldn't require underground parking. It'll obviously be one of the first things that when they get one of their exceptions that they'll take exception to. But it's okay. So they use up that exception.
So I would say if you're strategizing to accept that something will be an exception, we should have standards for what you think the exception will be, because they'll still then put above grade parking, and we need standards for above grade parking. To Councilmember Holland's point, we could look at incentives rather than pushing them to above grade or addressing that. We can address both, but then try and find ways to incentivize them to do below grade parking instead.
And
So-
what are your thoughts on parapet parking?
Pardon?
Parapet parking, like a half a floor.
Right. Or maybe it's partial subterranean, or it's at grade, but it's built into the massing.
I like that.
So I'd like to talk or spend just a minute and talk about what I think a market-based solution would look like. And so that a developer would come in and do. And so, and I'm specifically talking about the Bay Road right now. And so underground parking for 27 cars, plus a bunch of other spaces for stairwells and for the ramp and for an elevator. That takes 172 feet long and 60 feet wide. Parking garages come in specific modules. On top of that, so that's underground parking. So on top of that, 3 levels or 3 floors above is enough space for the 14 units that would be allowed in 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, nice condos, and then the 3 low-income units. So that spans across the whole front or the whole width, most of the width of one of the lots on Bay Road. I think a developer can afford to pay the cost of buying that land and build that underground parking and build that 3-level structure and sell those units for enough to make significant profit.
Yeah.
So.
And that should be the incentive for
Right.
it. But they will not be very low or low income modules.
3 of them would be for
Three will.
would be low income based upon what the state says and what the housing element says. The other 11 are going to be market rate units, and they're going to sell in the range of $2 to $3 million. So I think something like that has the built-in incentive for developers to actually do. So then the question is setbacks and all the other things. And so I have a couple of suggestions on that. And so one is I would actually set the setbacks at 20 feet front, 20 feet all the way around, 20 feet on the sides, front and back. On the sides, it's 172 feet. And so that only leaves 24 feet on each edge for a setback at max, if it's a 172-foot structure, which you need for the parking. And so that setback is going to be a driveway that Carol was talking about for truck and fire trucks to come in and then go all the way around and come out the other side. If the parking, the visitor parking is on site behind the unit, the road would come around behind that. And then I'm proposing in that last 20 feet setback that it's not just a setback in terms of structure, but it's also a setback in terms of no hardscape. For a site that's going to have 80% or 90% of hardscape coverage or impervious coverage, it needs a place for all that water to go. And so there should not be any hardscape in that zone, and all the water will drain there. So that's where I'd like to start.
Okay, good point.
But we have water drainage requirements
Yeah.
already that I don't think we need to worry about
Big
it.
detention.
They're completely
You
taken.
know,
Yeah,
under-
detention
care of
everything's
the water.
piped
They have to put-
down below, even your gutters.
No, I understand that. So
Green, well, implementing, green detention ponds or, underground detention ponds.
my point is,
Bioswales on these.
my point is, this is a whole different animal than
Yeah.
what we're dealing with in terms of the amount of water. And so you need the space for that
Yeah.
in terms of the bioswales. And so what I'm proposing is that last 20 feet in setback actually be set aside, right, for that.
I just think that, there are some homes that are being built now, single family homes that are as huge and massive and, as what we're talking about here.
Right,
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
I just-
I've approved a couple. Yeah.
Also, you
Yeah.
have to allow for 27 cars. I mean, you're talking about 11 units. You don't need 27 cars for 11 units,
The market would demand 27 cars.
for 11 units. I don't believe that.
13.
It's 14 units.
11 he's talking Bay Road.
Yeah, he's saying that.
There's 11 units.
Well,
the
Plus the
the
density
bonus.
bonus.
Plus the density bonus, 3.
Plus the density bonus is 11. If
It'd be
it's
14.
2 density bonus Oh, one has 12.
Right.
I think you're wrong.
Right.
Well,
I
I'm
think you're
looking
right.
at the chart.
I like it.
I had trouble digesting what you said without visuals. It's hard to, it didn't all compute for me. But your thought that we have to have standards that are practical for somebody to build Atherton type condominiums is definitely correct. I don't want to bother. I have a lot of notes. The only other thing that I think hasn't been mentioned, I mean, we definitely want to ban decks and balconies, but a whole effort has to be put into equipment. That includes trash, it includes heat pumps, it includes noise, it includes shielding, access, et cetera. I think we could sacrifice first floor area ratio readily, including front setbacks and maybe even side and back setbacks. But I think second floor, that's a non-starter. We've got to limit the second floor floor area ratio and setbacks. That's mandatory.
Second and
No,
third,
the
right?
third
Second
floor.
and third.
Well, yeah, that was my next point.
Third.
Are we really going to allow 3 stories? And I don't think I think it's hard to not allow 3 stories if you want anything to be built.
Right.
My last, and this is more of a question. All this stuff has been built around the big house concept. So are we saying that the fourplexes that Carol was talking about, or the kind of development that our friend here wants to do, is not going to be allowed?
Not
Mm.
necessarily. I mean, this is the maximum envelope that we're talking about right now. So if you were allowing multiple buildings to accommodate the multifamily units, what are the required setbacks for those? Does it change?
Well, I think it very well might, but the issue is, are we going to not allow that?
No, I
Because
think we have to
Because
allow it.
that rules out a lot of these odd shaped properties, you could much more easily build several small standalone units and have a better finished product for the neighborhood.
Well,
And we're not talking about any of it.
maxing out your total density, allowable density.
Do we know what the setbacks are that were for the condos that actually got sold for $3 million something a piece that are over on the Roger Reynolds property? Those are extremely attractive units. They were in high demand when they went on the market.
There are
Yeah.
3 stories too, right?
Yeah, there were 3 stories and, they had individual garages. I think that they only had 1 garage per, but I'm not sure. But yeah, it'd be good for us to check that. Now, one side backs up to the train tracks, but there's a house on the other side. And the other side backs up to, to an office building, et cetera. And then the third side backs up to other condos that are on Pine, I believe it is. And so,
So I don't have the numbers, but I think that the most common multifamily solution that's being built in the Bay Area right now is actually townhouses. It's not it's not a single structure. And so again, I appreciate staff is responding to what you're hearing from the community. And I assumed you didn't talk about townhouses because you've ruled it out. But in fact, townhouses is what, for the most part, is actually
that's what I
being
brought
built.
up at the beginning of the
Yeah.
meeting, Tom. I think individual condos is really what people want to have in the townhouse environment. Yeah, I agree.
I don't
Well,
see how
And so that's basically,
these setbacks, you can't do.
Yeah,
that
I know,
these
not with
setbacks.
those setbacks.
Condos.
That's correct.
But that's why
In order to keep us kind of orderly.
Yeah.
Anthony, I have a slide for you to bring up because we're kind of moving on to question number 3, Question 1 and 2 was effectively, did we catch all of the things that we need to look at? And if not, what are those? And then question number 3, that's slide 61.
So did you add drainage on that? I mean,
And
as
we
a,
can come back to
okay,
that
right.
because it,
I have something about this.
okay.
So because I think I have two things. Having this many heat pumps on one lot is potentially a noise problem. And I just wanted to flag both the City of Palo Alto and Silicon Valley Clean Energy are doing a noise study about heat pumps. Because there are certain heat pumps I have 2 on my lot, they're silent. So there's different technologies and decibel levels that we could require as part of this development that I would love for the town to watch that our neighbors as they're ahead of us on that, doing that research. Because I think if you have 25 silent heat pumps, who cares? If there's 25 loud ones, that's a big problem. So having that information in our code would be good. I'm also, as it relates to setbacks, I'm wondering, can we do different setbacks for different neighborhoods? Because I think like the Ravenswood lot, the neighbors have indicated they would rather have a smaller front setback. I think the Bay Road neighbors have done the same. I don't know that Oakwood would want that. So I'm just wondering, are we allowed to vary our setbacks by zones or regions?
Spot zoning?
I mean, it's not spot zoning, it's more neighborhood, reflecting the neighborhood kind of. So I'm just curious if that's something we can consider.
We can look at it and get back to you.
Okay.
I would say that we want to be cautious of spot zoning. Certainly, the more properties that fit a certain typology, the easier it is to have varying standards for them. You know,
And the more feasible way to do it might be the way I think your side setbacks are covered in your SR1A. If it's, you get to, the side setbacks are set based on how wide your lot is. So once your lot starts getting narrower, it changes what the side setbacks are supposed to be. That might be a better way to do it. And I assume we're gonna have to do that for Oakwood anyway. 'Cause
So
it's our intent, but it's a much different shape of a lot.
also, before we leave this slide, so I'm wondering about the FAR ratio. So the question is for the, first off, for the low income units, are they exempt from FAR? And then the state's bonus units, are they exempt from FAR? Which I would think they are. And so if half your units are exempt from FAR, just looking at it gets to be a much more complicated calculation to figure out what are you regulating.
so no, they're not exempt from FAR unless that's one of the concessions that they seek through the density bonus program.
So we would need like a 50% FAR or something like that for 14 units on less than an acre.
Well, I think what Tom was showing, we were getting for 13 units at an acre, we were getting approximately 30% FAR.
Yeah.
0.3.
Yeah, 0.3.
Approximately.
Yeah, again, those are small units.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was something we can look at it and
Right.
report back.
I just want to add a couple of things real quick. First of all, everything Rick covered, I agree with. So all the things you highlighted, as long as we add the deck and some of the other things that Tom brought up in terms of drainage. The other thing I want to make sure that we don't do is have a design in our head and have it come out differently in use. So one of the issues with putting the garages not in the back, and I understand all the reasons not to put them back there, is it creates more green space behind the unit that potentially is party space, and with 27 people or whatever, all of a sudden you've got everybody having a picnic out back there making noise for the neighbors. So just think about, I mean, just be sure. One of the designs that was talked about early on was the courtyard model, where I've seen these units
attached garage.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's all, and if you go along the strip along Palo Alto, in the area on Central Expressway, there's a whole row of these townhouses that are next to each other. Also in San Francisco, the same thing. And very often the garages are in back in San Francisco, and in Palo Alto, that's the same way. The garages, there's an alley back there where they come in. That's also very common in LA, where there's a access for the cars in the back. So it allows, and if you bring the setback forward, that allows the person to come in, go around the back, all the headlights go into the garage facing away from the neighbor. And so,
Yeah. So I've evaluated this as well. I will tell you that the impervious coverage is really high on those as well.
yeah,
But because you've got roadway in front of the units, you've
Right.
got, and guest parking in front of the units. You have a common aisle down, if the garages face each other, you've got an aisle down there. You have another drive. So it's just the asphalt really adds up.
yeah, but there are other surface materials that actually allow the water to go through, that we could also look at too.
Got
So,
it right out here.
yeah, right. So it's just a matter of how we spec that, because we can reduce the amount of total impervious surface by requiring a different kind of surface on those roadways.
I think we should require the hardscape to be pervious.
Yeah, that's it. I
We
agree.
have it out here and
Yeah.
it worked extremely well in the
It
rain.
solves
last
a
year.
lot
We
of
had-
drainage.
We had a lot of rain.
Right.
We had zero problem
Right.
with this surface.
Right, exactly.
One thing we haven't addressed is common space use, like a pool.
Right.
I think we should prohibit a pool
Right.
from these
Right,
multifamily units.
right.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
And sport courts.
And and I
You
think
mean
that
pickleball?
Yeah.
I think that Eric's comments about if we're really gonna look at putting the garage on the front, I want to see some images of what that looks like.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about it, that people will feel like it's totally out of character for Atherton, seeing as how there's nobody that has that. And they're not
Well,
allowed to have.
They're
it.
down Menlo Park on ECR, but the thing is that, as was Tom brought up, the whole area is paved. Because it has to be big enough for cars to go in and out, plus it has to be big enough for the fire truck to go in and turn around. And so it's from the front of the driveway, and then you have the apartments, and then the whole area inside there is paved.
But I think if you're gonna put a garage in the front and then you're gonna have a 3-story building behind it, you're gonna have to have paving all back there anyway, because a fire truck is gonna have to get into it.
Right.
And they're not gonna get into it over the garage. They're gonna have to be able to drive back there.
No,
So
Exactly.
The common,
have the
Yeah, that's what I'm
paved.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
the common model is a 2-car garage on the ground floor with maybe a 12 by 12 space, which is an entry for the unit. And on top of that, on top of the garage, on top of that, whatever that space in the front is where the living space is, and another level up is bedrooms.
Right.
That's basically how these
Right.
work.
That's right.
And you can
That's different.
you can have them, jammed together.
Right.
All the garages facing one direct. I mean, they're literally in Sunnyvale. There are hundreds of these.
Yeah,
And
that's a
so
very common
it's
model there.
It's like 6 units
Right.
together. Garages face one way, another 6 units, garages facing that. And so you have basically an alley for garages.
Right.
And you have landscaping and walkways on the other side for entrance. And so if we happen to do this on one of the Bay Road, or not us, but if a developer decided he wanted to do that, you would have facing Bay Road, the entrances into the townhouses. And then you'd have another set on the other side facing toward the rear, and you can pull that forward toward the front.
If
front setback.
you would like, I can pull up the Stone Pine.
Yeah. Yeah.
One, you can look at that model. that he's
Google, you
talking
gonna
about.
Google map it for us?
Yeah, you make sure I can share my screen.
Yeah.
You can
Let's do
also,
that.
you can also develop the units where the garages face the side and people come in the side and go in that way and they come out
Yeah.
that way, that That way,
mean,
the
there's a
central unit,
million
the
ways
backyards
to
are
do
all
this.
facing.
Yeah,
You know,
it is.
there's just
It doesn't
million
have to be
ways
in
to
any
do this.
specific way.
So this is the development that the mayor was talking about on the corner of Encinal, backs up to Stone Pine. And as Tom was talking about, if you look at them from the front,
Go to the street view. Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
the frontage view
Yeah.
where they're closer
And all the
to-
garages are behind.
to the front. But then if you go into the units,
May not allow you to go into the units. Oh, it is. Oh,
No,
yeah, that's
you
good.
can see into the units, and then this is an alley that he was talking about with the garages on the bottom
Right.
floor. This is a 2-acre site and it's got 22 units on it.
Right.
Yeah.
And they all sold for the 2.5 million to
3.2
3.
million.
Yeah, I just saw the sales. Yeah. And there are no above, there are decks above.
There are decks above, but I believe they're all interior
Yes.
to the site.
So George, this is actually great. One of the problems on these sites is they're not providing enough for parking, and if there's no on-street parking. Yes, they're told, because I was at Friends a week ago, and this is what they told us. You
Park right
pull up
there in
and
front of the
park in
garage.
the garage.
Uh-huh.
Of their own garage. I have a
Of their
friend.
own garage.
Yeah, I have a friend who has me do that.
It's all over the
That's gonna
place. I was at a brand new development down there, you know, similar to this, and they don't have parking.
People park in front of my garage when they come visit me.
So
That big a deal.
what's question number 3 that you'd like us to answer?
Yes. So question
Like,
number
oh, do
3.
you have something else? Okay.
Sure.
All right, then we're gonna go.
Just
to
looking at that
question-
image, I think interior facing decks should be allowed. I mean, if the main goal is privacy, I don't think
Right.
interior facing decks is a problem.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
I agree.
Interior facing decks
Decks.
are okay.
Do
It's
those
really-
have, does that unit, those units have common walls? Are they
Yes.
connected?
Yes.
There are some common walls and then there are the separate buildings with other common walls.
So we're
So
back to separate
So-
buildings.
So they're like
That's
four,
why I was
like
saying
4 in a
something
row
like
and then there's a alley with
Large
the
houses.
garages and
I
then
don't
4 in a row and alleys and
And
garages.
this is actually the perfect segue to number 3, which
He
is,
was one that did.
are you on board with the large family typology, large
Already
single
did.
family home
Already did.
typology exclusively? Or do you want to branch out and have us look at other things such as this development here, where now we're having a conversation about how you would accommodate
Large house there.
this, the entry
I do
or the
not.
programming for every unit and the number of parking spaces.
Mhm.
So this would be a good example of more of a townhome.
Exactly. Yeah, let's
There's-
just not focus on the large house.
Yeah, I
concept.
don't think large apartment buildings are what
I,
people in
I don't like
Atherton
any
want to
of
have right next to them. Okay, I think it really has bad connotations. to-
because we build a lot of large houses.
I know, they'd rather see a large house than
I would also
Bill,
say
the,
that
the public workshops that they had, there was a lot of interest in it looking like a big house. So that's
Understand?
Yeah.
why we went
Exactly.
down this road.
That's why.
I agree with you, but we can't disregard all the public input we got.
Yeah,
And
but
that's where
it's
we
just not one size
started.
fits all, Bill. I
Yeah.
mean, we
Yeah,
can have.
could be
you know,
whatever
different
the
design
developer
criteria.
wants.
Looking at this aerial photograph, it should be clear that these don't have 60-foot setbacks,
Right.
right? So
No, not at
there's,
all.
there's a lot, this is
15
also a
foot
greater
setbacks.
FAR,
No, I think they're like 20.
what's shown
big
here
foot.
than
Not between
30%.
the units.
And
The
it's
sidewalk.
3 stories, 2
Three-
stories of
No,
living
it's
above
not.
the garage.
You're right.
It's 2 stories, I believe.
Yeah,
Let's
it's
look.
2 stories above, but I think there's also certain.
Tuck under, yeah. So that's a 3-story unit
Yeah.
or a 3-story building.
but there's typically a little bit of space. on
Right.
the ground floor for the
Right.
entry,
Right,
access to garage.
exactly. So
Can I just say something?
Elizabeth pointed out there's a 4-foot setback or 3.5-foot setback.
Maybe 15, maybe 10.
Leave this image up. So just, if I could just respond to Commissioner Polito.
Yeah.
I don't feel like if we develop standards that talk about this kind of activity, design activity on the front facade, that we're turning our backs on the people who said we want a big house.
Right.
Because we were listening to them and I was always clear with them that we'll try to make it fit in your current setbacks, but it doesn't necessarily mean you can for multifamily housing. So I think if you start to look at the architectural character of what you see from the street, it works here with, which I guess is a stacked townhouse, or it could work in an apartment building, or it could work in a big house. But as the woman who called in, I forget, Carol, if you're gonna have fourplexes, you're gonna have to have multiple buildings. So you're still gonna have to have standards that deal with these kinds of issues. You
Right.
know, how the roof form
So you
can
need
help
that
break up the
complex
mass, how
Chateau
the,
and
where the,
Versailles,
where the
Valparaiso.
balconies could go, they can face inward, but they can't face to
Is
the
it
side and
Francis?
rear.
Well,
But I think,
the question is, are we going to allow fourplexes? Are we going to allow multiple buildings? That was my question, because it's a particularly big deal on these odd shaped lots.
so on this particular development, though, it's also important to note, the ones that are closer to the street and interior to the site are your 3 stories. These at the back that back up to the adjacent neighborhood are 2.
Right.
And
Right.
each
And
individual
that's
building
so,
is probably
so
4 to 6 units, right?
Y-
Each
yeah,
individual
so
building.
if they're on one of the Bay Road sites, if the number is 14, 3 of those units are low income units, which would be a 2-story, could be a 2-story unit, depending on how the windows are handled.
Yeah.
But,
So-
but the coverage, I mean, I think it's a beautiful project, and we know for a fact that property values there were quite good. So it was a doable project, but the floor area ratio and the lot coverage is out of this world to get to 22 units on 2 acres. I guess I kind of have this feeling that to keep everybody won't be happy, but to attempt to keep everybody happy, that maybe 10 units per acre is the wrong number. Maybe we should be at 8 so that our second floor setbacks in particular can be greater and that we don't have to cover so much of the lot that blah, 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 blah.
Well, so the problem with that though is the state bonus. Staff in here shows what the state bonus is at 35, 35% state bonus and 20%. But there's also, you can go up to 50%. So that's the issue. I mean, so it's not 10 units per acre, it's 15 units per acre.
I understand, but we get to 15 units per acre because we're zoning these places for 10 units an acre. I'm saying maybe that's the wrong number.
Yeah. So if it was 8, it would be 12.
The wrong starting point.
Yeah, yeah. So if it was 8, it'd be 12 units.
Commissioner Polito, we actually started this discussion at 20
Yeah.
dwelling units per acre this summer and lowered to 10. If we lower it anymore, I'm already concerned that the state won't accept 10 dwelling units per acre, and I advised against lowering it.
Yeah. Sell something.
It gets changing it at this point.
Yes,
Yes,
Okay.
and I advised against changing it from 20 to 10.
yes.
Well, close it down. So I think it's wise to look at this townhouse model, but if this townhouse model requires the elimination of the setbacks, it's gonna be the neighbor's worst nightmare.
Yeah, but
There.
that's where we come, that's where if we can go with this model, but not with that format, right? So if you have that format on a 4-acre lot, it's much, that's doable. It's just, I wouldn't put it on a 2-acre lot in Atherton.
Well,
think it
but we're
depends-
talking properties that are all 1-acre lots,
Right.
basically.
Right.
But, if the frontage is on a busy street like Bay Road or El Camino,
Right.
And the front setback is minimalized.
Right.
Who's gonna be complaining
Yeah,
about
so maybe
that?
you can do this and keep this,
I agree.
the
So-
side and rear setbacks.
Yeah.
Yes,
but
I mean, that's how I
Give
see
up
it.
on
I
the
see it
front
too.
setback.
That's how I see it
I
too.
think that's a possibility.
Yeah.
I just think that the one thing that we want to think about is even on a shorter setback, we still want it to look like an Atherton kind of setback, right? So I wouldn't want a 15-foot setback. I would want it to look like that we'd have greenery in there and have this, some 20, 25, something like that.
Not 50
Yeah,
or
right.
60.
Right. But I still think we want to make it so it imparts an additional space that you wouldn't see. And one of the things I really hate going up and down El Camino is sidewalk door. You're like, really? I mean,
Stanford,
you
yeah.
trip as you walk out your front door and you're in the traffic,
Development in Menlo Park on El Camino.
Yeah.
Near where the Dutch Oasis used
Yeah,
to be.
yeah,
Duncan Madison
Yeah,
built that.
yeah.
And, but people live there.
I know,
Yeah.
but we don't want to
Oh,
replicate
like,
that.
it's like Stanford.
So-
you know, they come
Yeah.
Right out, right up the sidewalk.
So in that, in the aerial photo right there, so you see the two buildings in front, sort of right there with the green space in between, or actually the one with the drive aisle in between. And I don't know how many units are in there, but if there were sort of 6 units in each of those, each side there, that dimension is like 132 feet. And so on a 170-foot deep lot, which is the Bay Road lots, you'd have basically 20-foot front and 20-foot back
Mhm.
setbacks. And you need it for the trucks to get around, actually. I mean, it's all going to be paving for a fire truck is going to have to go around.
So this this lot is 234 feet long along the frontage there along Encinal. And there's 6 units there along with the drive aisle.
Yeah, and the fire access, a lot of it is dependent on how long their hoses are. And so the fire marshal could give us some guidance on that, but if in fact there's a nearby hydrant, then the fire truck isn't gonna go in there. And that's where, in that space there, I don't believe that there's really space for a fire truck to go
I
in.
think-
Towards the back there is, but I believe that's more for trash pickup than for anything.
Well, it's
So
definitely
if you-
that, but it's also the ladder truck. So if they have to reach
The third floor.
the third floor, they have to do it with a ladder truck.
At this point in time, most of those ones in the back are
So
second, but okay,
typically-
fine,
Yeah.
no problem. We have to talk to the fire marshal and he'll give us some guidance on what we can do and what we can't do. But
But-
I agree, and it's a big development. You need a big space for the small fire truck to be able to turn around.
Go ahead,
Brittany?
Brittany.
Sure, I just wanted to point out that in developments like this, typically you'll see those curves were all painted red. That's why there's no visitor parking. That's because the fire department has required
Yeah.
that they be painted red so the truck can get right there.
Right.
And that's in addition to whatever hose distances are required.
Right. All right, so
I have feedback based on this model. I like, if we are looking at separate structures, I think it's a good idea that what they did of having a lower height limit when it's closer to the fence line, and it's restricted to 2 stories when it's closer to the fence, but higher in the middle. Given that, again, our main goal is privacy, and one of the images you showed was with those decks and the impact of having structure between the fence. I think that's a good idea is what I'm saying for feedback.
Stacy, I think that's kind of site specific because the Middle Plaza project along the train tracks, those are the 4-foot, really tall units that Stanford built. And as you come into the El Camino side, they're lower.
Yeah.
So that's kind of site specific,
Mhm.
site specific.
yeah,
So
they're five.
It
back
depends
there.
upon who's your backyard neighbor, or who's your front yard neighbor.
I ask a question, an idea. Would it make sense to develop a privacy program where it's, hey, here are 5 things and you have to pick 3 of them, or something like that, where we could build in some flexibility with the goal being maximize the privacy for the lot that you have? Is there something that we could build along
Yes.
those lines?
Yes, so that is actually, it's like I asked you to bring this up. In our November 1st presentation, one of the slides that Tom had for you, and it's also covered in the staff report, are different ways that you can set up objective design standards. So you could have a point system where you have to have, we really see this in kind of green building. You do 10 different things to get 10 points, and that's the point level you have to acquire. For privacy, it could be you have to
And so I actually think staff needs to sort of create an image of that, and I'd be happy to help you with that. Because we need to go back to the community and be able to say, this is what it would look like. We don't think this is what you really want. And instead, we really would like this more distributed model.
I think it's either or.
Yeah, I don't
It
think
can't
so.
be
I never felt that
We could.
the community meetings I went to, it seemed like this was one of the ways to address an approach that might be another approach that could fit the community along with the ones that were being proposed. So it was never like this was the only answer that I felt that was going on in the public hearings.
So staff needs 2 sets of objective design standards then.
Well, we need to have options. And so what else? What
We're
else?
just starting this conversation.
Yeah.
It feels like it's been ongoing, but that's because the meeting was continued. We got a little sidetracked, and that's okay. But this is really still the beginning of this effort. And part of the reason that I'm asking to get so much feedback tonight is because, of course, yes, we would love to go back to the community and get more information before we come back and ask you to adopt anything.
And if I could add, the RM10 will be its own chapter. RM20 is a whole different thing because you can't do the big house at 20 dwelling units per acre.
And those are only on school sites presently, right?
But there's,
So
we're on board to write 3 things, the RM10, RM20, and RM40, which will actually just be a piece of the RM20. And the RM20 and the RM40 are all for the PFS sites.
So Brittany, you said that there was one more thing that you wanted, the third thing you
I had-
wanted to go over.
We've been-
So
We've been talking about question number 3 already. That's
okay. Is
alternatives.
there
to the
anything
Blue Rope.
else?
Yeah, I have 3 more questions.
okay.
So Anthony, can you pull up slide 54? Sorry. So this slide was fairly provocative at the last meeting. It will come up in a minute. It is effectively a list of all of the standards that were already identified in the housing element. Slide 55, right? So the first is the RM10, 23 Oakwood. That's really the focus of my question for you tonight. But also up here on the slide, I didn't change the slide. This is just what was presented previously, but it also gives them maybe some context for this conversation. The PFS sites were RM20 and RM40, 4 stories, 48 feet, some front setback reductions, potential parking reductions. But my first question is, so for 23 Oakwood, which was the only RM10 property listed in the housing element, the housing element says heights up to 40 feet and then adequate setbacks to reasonably accommodate maximum density. So the focus of this question is, do we want to depart from that and update the housing element when it comes back before you with other changes? Do you want us to stick with this? More broadly for all RM10 lots, we've been talking about 3 stories. This is 40 up to 40 feet, which we think accommodates 4 stories at 10 foot floor to ceiling height.
So I think what it has to say is that has to say it's 3 stories and max of 40 feet. It's the and, not the or. But the other thing I would say is if we're, I think that's fine if we're talking about the big house, because the big house is going to have a flat roof and it can have a roof screen at the edge, but it's going to be a flat roof. But if we're talking about the townhouses may have a pitched roof all the way up. And I'm not sure that on a 3-story building that you can get that pitched roof in 40 feet. So we should confirm that. And we should be able to do that by looking at that one project we were talking about. And then on the PFS site, the 48 feet, I think that should be 45 feet because there's a building code limit for type of construction, type of wood construction. I think the limit it's 4 stories and 45 feet, I think, but we should confirm that.
So I believe at the beginning of the meeting, Rick suggested 35 feet as opposed to 40 feet, and I didn't hear anybody say, oh, no, until now. So I think we need to decide which we want to go do, and.
No, that's my point. I don't think 35 works on the townhouse.
Okay, and,
Okay. A clarification about the 40 feet. If it's a gabled pitched roof going up, it's one thing. If it's a square box flat roof going up for 40 feet, that's a whole nother ball of wax. Okay,
I completely agree. And so we should define that.
yeah,
So to me, the roof deck, if it's a flat roof, is 33 feet. But if we put a gable roof on top of that and it's a 45-degree angle, that's a different story. Yeah. I mean, it could easily be 10 or 12 feet.
yeah, for
So-
architectural features, and it doesn't take up the whole mass.
Yeah.
and then on the school areas, especially for
Not
the
the
RM
college.
40, there are no neighbors there, so if structurally they can build that, then I don't see a problem with having it 48 feet. But if there's a structural issue, then yeah, for sure, we want to make sure that whatever they build is not dangerous, and I would expect that their architecture would be
it's-
that way.
It's just a building code that you can use one type of construction, which I think is up to 44 stories, and I think it's 45 feet. That's all.
I think the
And
concept
beyond,
was
if you go taller than that.
12 feet per floor. 4 times 12 is 48.
Yeah.
No, but there's a specific building code on this.
So we
Well,
need
we
our
may have to
building
modify the building
inspector
code.
to.
You
Cur-
send back-
currently-
just need to say 48 or 45, whichever you're comfortable with, because the building code will kick in at
trump
whatever.
it.
If they're gonna build it out of
Right.
wood, or they're gonna build it out of concrete masonry block, it'll
Exactly.
be different standard.
Isn't our height limit right now 30 feet, R1A?
Um,
Oh,
I think it's I think
R1A.
it's 34 at the
34,
bridge.
I think. is
34.
It's
so
not
what I
R1A.
wanted to add is some
CFC.
way in
CFS.
the way that the code works right now to dictate roof form, which is what you were talking about, is it has end wall
28 feet.
measurements as
Sidewalls.
well. And so the uppermost part of the roof is set at a specific height, and then there's height requirements for the end wall. And that's what brings the roof line down. So one thing that we haven't talked about at all tonight in terms of standards that we look at are end walls. And
Mm-hmm.
that could be a way to dictate roof form if that was something that we wanted to see.
Well, right now, I think R1A, the sidewalls are 28 feet. And you're saying the overall height is 34?
Right.
Personally, I don't think anything that we're talking about here should be any higher than that. That's my personal opinion.
Except for the PFS sites.
Right.
Well. It's
I
on
don't
slide.
know why we wouldn't set the RM 10 at 35 feet and the PFS at 45 feet. I'm fine with that. I don't.
Me too.
Well, okay, so the question I have is, if consistency to the current form is 34 feet, why would we put 35? I mean, because we went through this whole discussion in our last, when we went through the iteration about this, the sidewall discussion, it had to do with a lot of people coming in saying, well, everybody else who has a gabled roof gets this higher amount and we don't when we do a modern home. And we went through all that process and we did change it to reflect it, to give them an opportunity to build a sidewall that was more acceptable to the design. We didn't raise it a lot, but we raised it a little bit so that we all approved that.
Just a little bit.
Well, here's what it was. They were saying that if you have a gabled roof, you get this high. And if you do a flat roof, you get this high. So we went through the whole discussion. You approved a change on that.
I didn't.
Well, it was approved, but that's
I
what.
would never have done.
All I'm saying though, is that there's no reason to change the 34 foot to 35 if that's the current standard, unless you had a reason for 35.
Only that they're going to 3 stories on 35, whereas in the current standard, they're not going to 3 stories. It's only 2 stories.
Who's going to? in the
So-
art-
Build a house, it's 2 stories.
I know, but.
Nobody can build a 3-story house.
So 33 or 34 implies a flat roof
Right,
and no pitched roofs.
right, that's correct.
So, so I think what, the models we were looking at and a lot of these, the townhouses have pitched roofs.
Right,
And so,
right.
so 34, 35 is not going to accommodate it.
You know, this is something that we can take a look at, especially
Yeah.
given the examples that have come up, and get back to you with options and recommendations, and then additional public comment and feedback, having shared those already. Really, I think the helpful comment here is heights up to 40 feet. Is 40 feet just kind of a non-starter? Is there some wiggle room? It sounds like there is, but you need us to come back and
Right.
explain it to you and give you some options and feedback.
I don't think there's wiggle room.
Well,
So other people might, but I will
Exactly.
not vote for it.
I have
So-
heard that.
Well, can you take a
No,
look?
I'll take a look at anything. I'm just saying, I think it's too much for
Just
Atherton,
because
period.
that's how you feel inside.
That's how I feel.
There's
the
no analytics going on here.
benefit of the
Your
study.
Could
emotion.
be, there could be.
I have something to say about 23 Oakwood. I think
Mhm.
just because they were the first doesn't mean that they should have different rules. So whatever, we didn't have any design standard discussions when it came to 23 Oakwood. So this was just a number that was on a document with no context for us. So I think 23 Oakwood should be treated the same as the other RM10
I agree.
lots.
I agree.
So that's,
Very good.
whether that's 40 for everyone or 30, whatever, I don't care. Same rules for everyone.
Exactly.
I agree with that. But I'd also say that I think the townhouse or a fourplex type design is going to meet what the letter is really talking about creating a subdivision of small lots, with individual homes that can be sold. So I think that the townhouses is actually a pretty good solution for that lot.
I think that the townhouse solution that you saw over near Stone Pine is probably a better fit for 23 Oakwood in terms of a model than the
Yeah.
large house
Yeah.
typology given this configuration.
What you don't want is a gigantic, if it was, if it was the big house, it would be 50% larger than the one on Bay Road, which is ridiculous.
Right. Okay. I just don't want to subdivide a parcel
Right.
into little individual parcels.
right.
Okay, it's a condominium, site, but it's not individual separate parcels.
No, but in his letter, he's talking about individual homes.
Yeah.
Whose letter?
Could be individual homes,
This
but
is-
they're not,
Landowner. Well, we
they're
don't-
zero
And
lot
for
line
clarification-
homes.
Not you, you're not talking about
For
that.
clarification, I'd just like to make it clear that this is in response to the letter provided by Mr. Arata relative to 23 Oakwood that was shared prior to this meeting,
Right. I remember that.
which
now.
discusses developing the lot with individual for sale, single-family detached homes at a higher density that would potentially be construed as multifamily.
Yeah.
But I thought it doesn't give us any credit for multifamily.
So that is the perception from HCD.
Yeah.
That this would not be considered multifamily because it's still detached, single family home for sale lots.
Yeah.
It's not to say that the town shouldn't ever consider allowing that type of development, but in terms of trying to meet HCD's multifamily target,
Doesn't
which
meet
is
it.
the focus of current conversation,
Why we're here.
right?
The other problem I have with it again is we're getting all types of pressure from HCD. The state's handing out these density bonuses. The state expects them to be used. And the 32 Oakwood is not taking advantage of the density bonus. And so to me, I favor small lot. I think it's a great solution, but it's not going to solve a problem for the town.
Allowing our lots to be subdivided into little things.
Yeah, that's the thing for me is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the fourth question. The fifth question was actually, should the PFS standards, which are on the screen, identified in the housing element, provide direction to staff? And should the large home typology guide building massing and site design for these properties? And I think this really was actually touched on a little bit at the last meeting, that whatever the RM10 solution was, didn't need to be applied to PFF sites. I think that's been reiterated here tonight. So unless somebody else has a comment contrary to that, we can move on to the next topic.
The only thing I want a clarification on is what does potential parking restrictions mean, reductions mean?
So the potential parking reductions would come from the state density bonus program.
Okay, all right, that, I understand that. I just wanted to make sure it was not that, more than that. Okay.
There also, I'd have to look into this. There might be state law requiring reduction of parking for student housing.
Right, that's why I understand that.
Okay.
There is.
So 6, similarly, and actually we can keep this slide up for this purpose. Council has previously discussed that multifamily development at public open space POS sites. Oh, can you go to the map so we
Yeah.
can see where the POS sites are? Perfect. So these are the sites that are outlined in green. We've Cal Water, Circus Club, Holbrook Palmer Park. Those are all being evaluated per the CEQA process right now. To look at preserving existing open space, but enabling a small number of units as infill development. Should the large home typology guide building massing and site design for these properties, or should there be maybe less restrictions?
Say the question again.
I think more restrictions.
Are we applying the large family home typology to these sites?
Oh, the green ones.
Super simplify it.
Oh,
No.
I'll say no. I say
No.
no.
Okay.
I mean,
'Cause
not
that's
demanding.
not what they're looking
If
at
somebody,
doing.
if somebody said that they wanted to do that, I wouldn't reject it out of hand, but I don't think we would mandate it.
Require it.
Right.
No.
We can look at so these sites do allow for caretaker units already. So we can look at what standards would apply to them. And again, with the spirit of only really promoting infill development, see what future development might look like here. But I think it's been very clear that any development that would be allowed through the housing element or code changes, if it moves forward, would be on areas already developed or already developed, like parking lots.
There's a question I've always had in the back of my head, and I always forget to ask it, so I'm gonna ask it while I'm thinking about this. Is there, there's no ability for us to designate an area senior housing, is that correct?
That's not correct
Okay, good.
entirely. The multifamily housing problem that we're trying to solve
Yes.
relative to affirmatively furthering fair housing
Yes,
cannot be restricted.
yeah, okay,
So for example, if the town wanted to specify that any future development on Holbrook Palmer Park was senior housing, the Circus Club had to be affiliated with the Circus Club, and Cal Water similarly workforce housing for their
Right.
use. That wouldn't count towards the AFFH issue
got
that
it.
we're working
Okay.
on.
so the answer is we could designate it, but it wouldn't count against, it wouldn't give us credit for our plan.
The value in pursuing this is that you're giving these locations flexibility to
Yes.
accommodate needs
Right,
in the future without having to come back and reinvent the zoning code to do
Right.
that.
could we incentivize senior housing without making it a detriment to other development? The reason I'm asking, so senior housing theoretically solves a lot of problems. It probably has a tendency to have reduced parking. It probably has a tendency to have reduced traffic. So there's
There may not be a need for the town, but I do think senior housing probably is.
We could look at exploring this in the future as part of programming in the housing
Got
element
it,
when we
got
come
it.
back.
Yeah.
I'm reluctant to add another
Yeah,
thing to
I
our
agree,
plate
I agree.
currently. But if, you know.
I just wanted
certainly
to
if
get it
you-
out. I've been forgetting it.
If you want to set up the town's housing program so that a future council is not caught in the situation on the next housing cycle.
Right.
That is something that we can look at.
Got it.
Well, I think if we, first off, the only comment about the water district area was at one time they thought they might build some employee housing. So specifying it as has to be senior housing
wasn't- I
means it's
wasn't-
going to be no.
Yeah, I wasn't going to be specifying. I wanted to know the answer to the question. That's all I wanted to
Okay.
know.
I
No,
see
but
that
just to
it-
further up, the Cal Water and the Circus Club site.
They're
were
not
very
in.
Clearly only employee housing and very small number of units, like I think
Three
maybe
or
two
four.
Right.
each.
the most.
Because they already have some units. The only place where you could look at something would be where the Gilmore House is in Holbrook Palmer Park, and there's no possible way
Yeah.
35 units.
Yeah.
So that's not going to happen anywhere in
Okay,
Atherton.
all right,
Right.
got it.
Also say like, we own the Holbrook Palmer land, and so we don't have to have zoning restrictions to make
Right.
it senior housing, because
Right.
we'll be the ones doing that developing,
Right.
so
Yeah, that's not the issue.
Well, we kind of own it.
it's our,
No, we own
we
it.
control it is how I would
Yeah,
describe
well,
it.
unless we do something
There you go.
illegal, then we don't know.
Accurate.
It's not illegal. we could
All right,
do
I'm
something
sorry I brought it up.
lose
I
it.
just wanted, I got my answer.
Sorry,
That's,
you brought it up.
I
also.
know, but I needed to know the answer.
For the record, I did not take your comment to apply directly to these three
Right,
POS
I-
sites. I heard it more as a holistic, town-wide
Right,
consideration that would inform future housing
Right.
elements.
that's correct.
That is the last question I had for you.
All right.
So, Tom, do you have any clarification you need?
If you don't have any clarification, I have problems. No, there's a-
Okay, anyway, any other public comments on this? Seeing none, I'll close public comments. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
You need a microphone. Give him a microphone. Here, you go.
Hi, David Rada. Oh, that's worse. 23 Oakwood Boulevard. I just want to say I'm very encouraged by the meeting that I watched it just now. We still have this crazy lot that's 135 feet long and 500 feet long and 135 feet wide. So the setbacks don't quite work with the big house, but they will work with townhouses. They will work with individual single family houses. The 427-foot side is got a 8-foot fence already because it's Redwood City on the other side of that fence. The setbacks on that side, the Sargent House, I'm sure you all know the word Sargent. The Sargent House is 6 feet away from that fence. So I think what we did in the last plot plan is move everything to that side and left the other side open with the drive. So it's at least 20 feet between that and the fence and the Curry's house and the other house. And so all this kind of works. It looks good. And I think you guys have a job that I know I wouldn't want because it's going to be hard to win.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to encourage the council and staff to be proactive in messaging out meeting times and future meetings around this to the public. I feel like it's been a little erratic how proactive the notification of meetings and times and locations has been. And I would like to encourage you to be a little bit more consistent and proactive about that going forward. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, can we have a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Okay.